to their classes. It is good to have Scott back with us today leading worship. And if you're new to Murray Hills, Scott was our full-time worship leader for 4 or 5 years. And so it's good to have him back today in that role. He always does a great job with it. Let's go ahead and get this out of the way. Giving. So I forgot this last week, and Judy had texted me and said, "Did you just forget it in the last service?" I said, "No, all three." Not just the last service. We forgot it in all of the services. And Ebony and I were texting. Ebony was going to do it in the host moment, and then I was going to say something in the sermon about it, about like, hey, if you're new to Murray Hills, this is a good time to give because we know exactly where it's going, that kind of stuff. And both of us forgot. All together, we forgot 6 different times. And so, which was kind of, we were texting about it Sunday afternoon, and we were both saying like, well, it's kind of cool on one hand, because you know it's clearly not the most important thing if you forget to mention it on the highest attended Sunday of the year. You know it's not that important to you, so that was kind of cool. At the same time, we had plans for those funds. Like we'd already told Dwell, yeah, we're going to give $25,000 to the playground, and we didn't just tell Tiffany we were going to give her some money. We spent it. This was up last Sunday. That's a new projector. I hope you can tell the difference between those. I mean, so we spent some money already. But you guys, you did it again. You pulled through. So I got the report from Jim, and we had just a little under 40,000 last Easter on Sunday. So I forgot. Most of you remembered. And I sent the little email out. $12,000 came in just from the email. So thank you. So 52 is where we at with that. And so 25,000 that goes to worship ministry. 25,000 that goes to the playground, and you know we'll use the extra if it costs us any extra on the playground. It's possible that will, and we hope that money is all spent, by the summer. So it'll be put to use immediately. Now, if you missed it, if you didn't get to give last Sunday and you didn't get to give Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, we do this every week. We just don't talk about it every week, but we do it every week, and it supports the regular kind of budgeted ministries of this church, and there's multiple ways you can give. The only thing that's not on this screen is the old-fashioned way of giving. So check and cash, there's collection boxes around the room. So today our text is Luke chapter 10, verse 38. So Luke 10:38, if you got a Bible app on your phone and you want to find it, or if you've got a Bible with you today and you want to find that text. We're in a series called Practicing the Way, and it's based on this book right here, John Mark Comer, by the same title. I'm subtitling mine, Becoming a Disciple of Jesus, because that's basically what this is. This is about becoming a disciple of Jesus. And I know a lot of you in this room are already disciples of Jesus. So this is a reminder about what that means. And we started last week with the question of, who do you follow? Which is another way of asking, who are you a disciple of? Which is a really, really important question. It's not a question of, am I a disciple? All of us are disciples of someone or something. The question is, who are you a disciple of? Who are you following? Who are you becoming? Who is your teacher? And we talked about the idea that disciple is a word that means student or learner. And in kind of a Western mindset, we think of learning as, give me information, and once I've mastered the information, I'm a disciple. I've done what I need to do. I'm educated, kind of thing. And in this mindset, disciple is not about just believing something that the teacher said or learning or mastering the content of the teacher's teaching. It's about becoming like the teacher. It's about imitating their way of life. And so I want to get just a little nerdy for just a little while at the beginning on the concept of discipleship. And because it'll help you kind of understand what it is that Jesus is calling us to. So in the Jewish concept of discipleship, this was around before the ministry of Jesus. So before Jesus' public ministry, there were rabbis, and these rabbis had disciples. And so when Jesus came and when he began the public ministry in his life, he was pretty quickly recognized as a rabbi. And at that time, it was like an honorific title. It wasn't something that they had to go through as particular education curriculum or that kind of thing. It's more of an honorific title, so people just recognized he's a teacher. And he was recognized as a rabbi before he was recognized as Christ, before he was recognized as the Messiah. So Peter saw him as his rabbi before he saw him as his Messiah. And most of his disciples felt the same way. Mary Magdalene, we looked at that John chapter 20 last week, that after the resurrection, when she saw the risen Christ, she didn't say, my Christ or my Messiah. She said, my Rabboni, my teacher is what she was saying. And so a couple of things about that. In that system, all rabbis had disciples. So Jesus was not the only rabbi in and around that area, and he was not the only rabbi to call disciples, because if the rabbis would call disciples, there were some real prominent rabbis in and around the time of Jesus, Rabbi Hillel, Rabbi Shammah, and you see stories about that. Jesus talks about, he doesn't mention them by name, but in the Sermon on the Mount, he's kind of referring to one of those teachings, in the Sermon on the Mount. So about how they interpret the Torah and that kind of stuff. But so there were many rabbis before and after Jesus, and they regularly had small groups of disciples following them around and learning from their teaching, sitting at their feet and learning from their teaching. And people would do this for Jesus as well. The second thing there is, so many of these disciples would leave everything to follow their teacher. So they would leave their careers, they would leave their homes, in some cases they would leave their families. And so when Jesus went to like Peter and Andrew and James and John and said, come follow me, that wasn't a weird invitation. That was the invitation of a rabbi to be his disciple. I'm inviting you to come and be my disciple. The only thing with Jesus that was different was he didn't call the top students or the most spiritual or the super righteous or anything. He called the fishermen and the tax collectors and the outsiders. And then the last part of that is the idea of discipleship. I just kind of talked about this already, but it was more than just learning. This is total imitation. This is about becoming like your rabbi in every way possible. And Comer in the book describes that as apprenticeship, which I think is a good way to think about it. He says, think about discipleship equals being an apprentice. So when Jesus is saying, come follow me, what he's literally saying is, come be my apprentice. Come learn my ways. Come learn to do as I do and live as I live. And, we're familiar with that idea. I'm sure there are still some trades that use apprenticeship. I mean, medicine in some way uses, I guess they call it residency, and those times, still uses that type of model. But long before there were, universities and colleges and trade schools and tech schools and all that, the way that you learned a trade was you apprenticed under someone more experienced than you. So, if you wanted to be a mason or a carpenter, you would find an experienced mason or an experienced carpenter, and you would learn their ways. You would become their apprentice. In some cases, you would leave your home and move into their home, and you would spend time with them. It wasn't like a 6-week degree of completion, a certificate of completion, or like a 2-year degree where, you've mastered all there is to know about masonry. We've taught you everything intellectually or conceptually. You did it. You lived with them. You watched what they did. You learned how to do what they did. You listened to them teach that. You tried to imitate their way of life. And so this concept of discipleship was very much ingrained in the Jewish way of life. And Jesus was inviting people to apprentice under him. And any apprentice or any disciple would really have 3 goals. And this is the outline for the series and where we're headed. Number 1 would be to spend time with your rabbi. When Jesus called his disciples, he said he appointed 12 that they might be with him and that he might send them to preach. But notice the order of things. He first invited them to just be with him. Just come and learn from me. And then the second was to become like your rabbi. And this is, again, the student is not above the teacher, but everyone who is fully trained will be like their teacher. So you hear Jesus teaching these Jewish concepts of discipleship, that you will become like me. And then the last one there is to do what your rabbi does. So that's where we're headed in the series. To put it in the context of Christian discipleship, the 3 goals of a disciple. If you say, I'm a disciple of Jesus, if you say, hey, I want to follow Jesus, I want to be baptized, I want to follow Jesus, then there's 3 goals. To spend time with Jesus, to become like Jesus, and to do what Jesus does. Those are the goals of a disciple. And that's where we're headed in the series. So each Sunday, we're going to take one of those goals. And I've burned half my time on this Sunday, so let's jump into number one. Okay, number one is spend time with Jesus. And I'm going to begin with confession here. I'm probably not the best one to teach this. So when you're a preacher at a church, you get to preach and teach on everything. Some of it you're really good at, and some of it you're not so good at. And it's like, there's probably some other people in the church that would be much more qualified to teach this one. And this is an example. Number one. And you're like, wait a minute, did I hear what you thought? You just said that you weren't very qualified to teach about goal number one. Did I hear that correctly? You did. Okay, and just hang with me for a minute here. So the way I did the series was he did a chapter on each of these goals. And so I'm doing a sermon on each of these goals. And I read this like 6 or 8 months ago. And so what I did typically was like I'd read through the chapter, I'd highlight parts of the chapter, and then I would go back through and look at what I'd highlighted and then kind of come up, identify a key text, and then come up with what I wanted to say in the message. And so my problem with this one was I went back and looked at what I'd highlighted, and all the pages looked like that in this chapter. Like I highlighted very little in this chapter on spending time with Jesus. There wasn't a lot of stuff I highlighted, because usually you highlight stuff that inspires you, or you find as interesting, or you want to emphasize, or you want to study some more about. And when I went back through to start writing this message, I was surprised at how little I had highlighted. And it wasn't because what he says is not good. It is good. It just, for whatever reason, it just didn't resonate with me as much as maybe it would have resonated with you. Because some of you would have read that chapter. Like the 3rd chapter, Do What Jesus Does, I highlighted a lot of that. I got that. That one fits. For me, I highlight, I like that. Oh, yeah, I like. But to spend time with Jesus, I just didn't highlight as much. And I kind of even hesitated to include it in the message, because I'm going to say it, but when I say it, some of you will get it and go, yes, I feel exactly the same way. I know exactly what you're talking about. And some of you will look and go, what? I don't understand. Why would you feel that way? And some of you will understand, yes, I feel that way, but I don't like the fact that you feel that way, because you're the pastor, so you should not feel that way. But I feel that way too, so I get it. So I understand all that. But when someone says, the number one goal of discipleship is to spend time with Jesus, I struggle to get excited about that, because and I'm not saying it's not important. Please don't hear that. I'm just saying that that's not number one for me. I lean more personality-wise to the doing than the spending time, and so sometimes it feels weird because I don't really know what we're talking about, and you've been there. I mean, if we're talking after church and somebody says, "Hey, come over to the house tonight, and come over at 6 o'clock. We're going to have dinner together, and then we're going to spend some time with Jesus," you would be like, okay, but what are we going to do with Jesus? Like, what are you talking about? Oh, no, we're just going to eat some dinner, spend some time with Jesus. You'd probably find a way out of that invitation, because it sounds weird. You don't like, what are you talking about? I don't know. Or if tonight somebody said, "Hey, come to our small group tonight. We have a great small group. Come to our small group. What do you do in your small group?" "Oh, we just spend time with Jesus." Okay, well, what do you do when you? Oh, it's incredible. We just spend a few hours with Jesus. You see, it sounds a little odd, and it's the reason it sounds odd is because we equate, and I'm talking about myself. I'm using a big we. We equate spending time with Jesus as doing nothing with Jesus. It kind of sounds like sitting cross-legged in the floor meditating, or having a super long quiet time, or a marathon prayer session. We're just going to get together for an hour or two and pray. When people say that, I'm like, ooh, that sounds terrible. An hour or two of praying? Like, what are we going to do? Listen, I understand, my personality is wired more for doing. I start getting antsy after 4 or 5 minutes of prayer. I'm kind of getting antsy, okay, and it's like, give me a project to lead, give me a problem to fix, give me a dilemma to solve, give me a ministry to coordinate, give me a cause to advocate. I don't want to sit at the feet of Jesus. I want to serve Jesus. Okay? And I know, like some of you are thinking right now, thank you for finally saying that. I feel exactly the same way. And others of you are questioning whether or not this is the church you want to stay at, because you're like, I can't believe he feels that way about this. And the reason for that is because some of you in this room are Team Martha. You're a doer, and that's the way you believe the best way to be a disciple of Jesus is to serve Jesus. And then some of you are Team Mary. And you say the best way to be a disciple of Jesus is to spend time with Jesus and to sit at his feet and learn from him. And if you have no idea who Team Martha and who Team Mary are, that's why I told you to turn to this passage right here. Famous story. It's in the Gospel of Luke, verse 38. It's just a quick story, but it says, as Jesus and his disciples were on their way, he came to a village where a woman named Martha opened up her home to him, and she had a sister called Mary who sat at the Lord's feet listening to what he said. Now, a couple of things we break down this passage. One, when Mary is sitting at the Lord's feet, she is assuming the posture of discipleship. So a disciple, sit at the feet of the teacher. So Mary's assuming the posture of discipleship. What's significant about that is that was not really available to women at that time. So rabbis had male disciples. And Jesus is allowing a woman to assume the posture of discipleship. And so that may be what bothered Martha, but it's likely that there was more going on that bothered Martha, because Martha is bothered by it. So to set the scene, Martha's busy getting everything ready because this rabbi has visited their home. And one of the marks of Jewish spirituality would be hospitality. I mean, we're going to provide hospitality, especially for a guest teacher, especially for this rabbi's visitor home. Martha's getting everything ready. Mary's sitting in with all the disciples listening to Jesus teach. And he continues, it says, Martha was distracted by all the preparations that had to be made. And she came to Jesus and asked, Lord, don't you care that my sister has left me to do the work by myself? Tell her to help me. This is why I say I'm Team Martha, because I totally get what she's saying here. I'm on her side. Yes, Jesus, tell Mary to quit sitting there and start doing something. Yeah, I'm with you. Like, get off your butt, Mary, and help me get this house ready. We got a rabbi sitting here. I sympathize with Martha. I'm on her side. Now, here's the problem. Jesus doesn't rebuke Mary. He rebukes Martha. It's not a harsh rebuke, but it is a rebuke. So Martha says, Lord, tell Mary to get up and help me. And Jesus says, Martha, Martha, you are worried and upset about many things, but few things are needed, or indeed only one. Mary has chosen what is better, and it will not be taken away from her. Now, he doesn't say Martha made the wrong choice. He just says that Mary made a better choice. And he tells Martha, you're distracted by a lot of things, and they're good things. Not necessarily distracted by bad things. You're distracted by some good things, but there's really only one thing that matters. And from the context, it's pretty obvious. The thing that matters is spending time with Jesus. I mean, that matters. That's an important part of being a disciple. And Martha's obstacle to it is the same obstacle that all of us have. We're distracted by all the other stuff we need to be doing for Jesus. Because most churches, most pastors, most teachers, including me, emphasize all the do's and don'ts of discipleship more than we emphasize just spend time with Jesus. I mean, we talk about, a disciple does this, and the disciple does this, and the disciple does this, and the disciple doesn't do this, and doesn't do this, and doesn't do this. And so we assume that the mark of a disciple is someone who adheres to a list of do's and don'ts, or someone who has a set of chores to follow, or somebody who has a set of rules to follow, and if you can follow the rules appropriately, then you're a disciple of Jesus. And Jesus is putting this, and he may just be doing this just because this is a problem for Martha and he's making a point. Okay, so, but I mean, he's putting it in the context of, no, being a disciple starts with just be with me. Just spend time with me. Sit in my love, consider my grace, observe from my life and learn from me. Just sit with Jesus. And this is why it's so important. Because if it all becomes about the do's and the don'ts, we can end up doing the wrong thing and avoiding the wrong things if it's not centered on Jesus at the outset. This happens a lot. Like I'm a very faithful church member, not really following Jesus that closely, but I'm really following the tenets of my church or whatever that is. The reason it's so important is because we become like the people we spend time with. To the point of you guys that moved here from New York, you start talking a little bit more like a Tennessean after you've been here 3 or 4 years, right? Because you just hang out with a bunch of Tennesseans and they all talk like I do. And so it's like you actually start taking on the characteristics of the people you're around. And if you're around a bunch of nice people all the time, you start to get a little bit nicer. Even if you're not normally nice, you start to get a little bit nicer. And if you're around people that don't cuss much, and you were doing that a lot, and you start to kind of clean up your language just a little bit more because, these people don't talk like that. I need to and so that's what the idea is. Like when we spend time with Jesus, we start to take on the characteristics of Jesus. And Jesus said this in John chapter 15. I don't have this one on the screen, but in John 15, he said, "Remain in me. And if you remain in me, the tree, if you remain in the connected to the branch, if the branches stay connected to the tree, then you'll produce fruit consistent with me." That's what Jesus is talking about there. And I told you I didn't highlight much in this book, but I should have highlighted this right here. I want to read you just a page of this because I think he gets it right here. He takes that concept of John 15, where Jesus invites his disciples to abide in him, and he said, this matters because whatever we abide in will determine the fruit of our lives, for good or ill. If we're rooted in the infinite scroll of social media, it will form us, likely, into people who are angry, anxious, arrogant, simplistic, or distracted. If we are rooted in the endless queues of our streaming platforms, then they will form us, likely, into people who are lustful, restless, bored, and never really present to what is. If we're rooted in the pursuit of hedonism, another drink, another toke, another hookup to take the edge off the pain and let us find a moment's peace, they will likely form us as well into people who are compulsive, addictive, and running from our pain and simultaneously from our healing. Insert examples ad nauseum. But if we are rooted in the inner life of God, that will also form us. And it will slowly grow the fruit of the Spirit in our lives. In other words, when we spend more time with Jesus, we end up being more loving, more joyful, more peaceful, more patient, more kind, good, faithful, gentle, self-controlled. Because these are the characteristics and traits of Jesus. And so when we sit with him, it's not a project, it's not another ministry, it's not another task to complete, it's not another class to attend. It's just abiding in Jesus. And it's an invitation, especially to the Marthas, okay? Especially to the Marthas, like, I'm not calling you just to do something for me, but I'm calling you just to focus your attention on me. It's not about just being busy all the time, just getting it done, but focus your attention on me, which is not easy to do in a world that values a list of do's and don'ts as the primary marks of a disciple. So I want to close with some practical suggestions, all right? Some ideas like, how do you do this? How do you, just like what I was talking about, like, hey, my takeaway from this message is you need to go home and spend some time with Jesus. And you go, what is that? What does it look like? I don't even know, how do you do that? All right, here's some ideas. Number one is start small and build up from there. So this is, if you decide to take up running one day, nobody says, I'm going to run today and tomorrow I'm going to do a marathon. That would be dumb, right? You could do it, but you're probably going to fail. And then you'd say, running's stupid. I don't know why I even tried to run. Right? What you do, if you're not used to running, then you're going to run a minute and walk 9. and then run a minute and walk 9. And then maybe next week you might run 2 minutes and walk 8. I'm just going to slowly build up to this. I'm going to add a little bit every day, and I'm going to slowly build up to this. So, if you're not used to spending time with Jesus, don't start with an hour-long prayer session. Don't say tomorrow, hey, we talked about spending time with Jesus. Tomorrow morning, I'm going to get up at 5 o'clock. I'm going to spend an hour with Jesus. You're going to fail at that. If you're not used to that, you're going to fail because it's like, it won't last for an hour. So start small. It may start with 3 minutes. It may start with 30 seconds. Whatever that is. Like, I'm just going to start with I'm going to spend just a little bit of time because this is about progress, not perfection. All right? So this is not about marking the checklist off. Nobody's going to go check, say, hey, did you get your quiet time in? This is just start small. The second one is start somewhere. And this is where I want to give you a couple practical ideas on just start somewhere. He talks about, if you're reading the book with me, he talks about contemplative worship. He talks about meditation. He talks about solitude, prayer, fasting. Like, these are all ways that we can spend time with Jesus. Like, it may be worship music is how you spend time with Jesus. Just listening to a song, just listening to the music of that song kind of reflects upon who Jesus is. It could be fasting. It could be prayer. I'm just saying, you don't have to do all of those. Like, okay, in my hour-long quiet time, I'm going to do some worship, and I'm going to do some prayer, and I'm going to do this, and I'm going to do that, and I'm going to do that. Just start somewhere. It may just be, prayer is usually the easiest one to start with, and it can be as simple as, God, I'm starting another day, walk with me. That's a start. Because what you're doing is inviting Jesus and recognizing Jesus into your life, into your existence. I'm just starting somewhere, all right? It's just one way to think about Jesus just a little bit more than you might not normally think about. Okay, so if you don't know what to pray, you can go to Matthew 6 and pray the Lord's Prayer. But really, you can't mess it up, is the way I'd put it with prayer. Like, we had some guys doing baptisms for the first time last week, and what I tell you, can't mess it up. Right? You're going to immerse this young man into Christ, not going to be able to mess it up. Same with prayer. God's just inviting you to speak with him. So speak with him, and you can be honest with him. So, and then the last one, this one I find especially helpful. Let the word do the work. So if you're like me and a long prayer time doesn't sound like your thing, or a long time of meditation doesn't sound like your thing, just one of the best ways to spend time with Jesus is to read the Word. So if you read the Word, you're reading about what Jesus did. You're reading about what Jesus taught, and that's some of the simplest way to do that. Just start in Matthew. Or actually, Matthew's not a good one to start with because the first chapter of Matthew, you'll be out. But start in Mark. Just Mark 1. I'm just going to read the first chapter of Mark. And that's the shortest one. In 16 weeks, you'll have read that book. If you just do, 16 days, you'll have read that book if you do a chapter a day. And you can do a chapter a week. That works too. Start in Luke. Start in John. You can spend time with Jesus simply by reading about Jesus. And you're like, yeah, but isn't there more to it than that? No, your mind's going to get formed as you're studying and listening to him because God continues, I think. God speaks to us through his word. So you read about turn the other cheek, and kind of makes you think about it the next time somebody insults you because, man, Jesus said turn the other. Or you read about loving your enemies, and it kind of makes you think about when you start wanting to think how you're going to get revenge on your enemies, and you go, well, Jesus told us to do this a little bit differently. So that's just some simple ways to spend time with Jesus, which is the first goal of a disciple. And to all the Marthas, don't worry. We'll get to the doing part in 3 weeks, all right? And I'll be ready to preach that one. Let's pray. Father, we looked last week about how being a disciple is not easy, and we know that. And we understand that for some of us this is easy, and for some of us this is not easy. But it's what you invite all of us to do. I mean, it's what you invited fishermen to do, and tax collectors, and just ordinary people to be your disciple. And so I pray you help us to do that in our lives, whatever that looks like, whether it's getting up early and trying to do that, or whether it's doing it at night, or whether it's doing it in the drive on the way into work, or whatever that is. Help us to figure out ways that we can spend time with you. and that we can focus our attention on you. And it's in the name of your Son, I pray these things. Amen. All right, next week, we'll pick up goal number 2. So I hope to see you then.